I hope you enjoyed that intro music. But in the meantime, before we get started and before you get glued to the presentation, have you shared the video yet? Have you subscribed? Have you liked? And you're going to have a lot of comments because this episode, the format is different. I'm talking less, but I'm bringing you different sound bites of comments that people have made about Africa. This episode is about Africa, not Nigeria. Comments that people around the world have made about Africa. Comments that people have made about the reason why you have the divide and conquer type of leadership in Africa. Comments that people have made about corruption around the world. So we're bunching it all in here. But before you get into it, I'll appreciate if you share, subscribe, like, and make a comment. Remember, the goal is to have 100,000 subscribers. The person you share it with may be the one that likes it so much that they share it with so many more people who make it go viral, who go on and subscribe. So my appeal to you is share.
Fred Wanko Ezudo Ezinwafosi Ajalebia, publisher, African Lifestyle Magazine, Chicago.
Hello everybody. Once again, this is Fred Wanko coming to you from our studios in Chicago with another edition of Bold Talk on Allen TV. And as usual, I'd like to say good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to you, depending on where you are around the world. In this episode, you're going to notice a little change of style. The way my sponsors are presented is a little different. But more importantly, like I said earlier, it's going to be less of my commentary and more of me sharing ideas and concepts from people around the world that I listened to and liked what they're saying about Africa and leadership in Africa or lack thereof. You're really going to like it. I think you will. And moving forward, I'll be tweaking the videos in a way that I'm going to be more like a resource distributor. You see that the way that I tweak the videos and the way I present them and the graphics that I present along with them kind of gives you a little more perspective on what it's all about. Why am I explaining all this? Because I really think it's the right time for me to reintroduce myself and reintroduce what I'm trying to do here. I was talking to a listener the other day, and they were saying they watched the video and they were asking me, I watched the videos, I like most of them, but what are you really trying to accomplish? And after rambling for a while, I said, the reality is that what I'm trying to accomplish is that I'm trying to build a brand. I don't live in Nigeria, I don't live in Africa, but I'm very interested in Nigeria and I'm very interested in what's going on in Africa. And I'm trying to build a brand that kind of steps outside the normal box, the normal way that Africans think. Anybody who knows me knows that I respect elders just the way Africans are supposed to. But I also don't respect elders that don't respect themselves. The same thing with authority. I've been in the United States for 45 years. In America, you respect authority, but you speak truth to power, to authority when they abuse their power. That's what I'm trying to do here. And that's a mindset that I'm actually trying to reinforce on Africa's youth, because our future is our youth. our youth can spend time respecting elders that haven't respected themselves. You should respect them traditionally. There's nothing wrong with that. But you should call them out for what they're doing wrong. But I hope you enjoy it. But don't forget, please share, please subscribe, please make your comments. I'm not always going to apply what you say, but it still helps guide my thought process.
This is how a society goes down the drain, really quickly. First, we overlook evil. Then we permit evil. Then we legalize evil. Then we promote evil. Then we celebrate it. And then we persecute those that still call it evil.
If corruption has overtaken community to the degree that the justice system is corrupt, the police is corrupt, everyone is corrupt, the ministers are corrupt, everything is corrupt, if that happens to any country, any nation, then those who are upright, their survival is at risk.
Around 2019, I was offered a scholarship to go and study abroad. And this is for the young people. I toned this down and said I wanted to remain in Africa, to study in an African university, to study in an African country, to better equip me to build on those bases and understand Africa more, integrate and interact with the young people out here so that we can shape the future that we want. From that day till now, I've engaged thousands of young Africans on dialogues, intergenerational dialogues, to provide a blueprint that we as young people can rely on for the sustainability of our continent.
1% of the population control the world. 4% of the population are their puppets. 90% of this population is a zombie, is a sleeping zombie. And 5% are trying to wake up the zombies. The 1% make sure that the 4% stop the 5% from waking up the 90%. This is not a war between two religions. This is not an ethnic war. This is not a racist war. It's none of these. This is the oldest trick in the book. Divide and conquer.
None of you can deny that what I'm saying is the truth. You know it's the truth. But either you won't write it, or you're too cowardly to speak it, because you want some favor here or favor there. So because you can't talk, you are muzzled. I'm not. I'm a free black man. And I didn't come here looking for a handout. And I really don't think you need one. Your problem is that you think you need a handout. Everything you need is right under your foot, but you're looking everywhere else for help instead of to yourself and what you can produce for yourself. This is Africa's dilemma. You are parading yourself before the world as international beggars when you gave civilization to the world. Your problem is not America. Your problem is not Israel. Your problem is not Britain. Your problem is your disunity and your dependence on others to do for you what you could do for yourself. You have some of the finest minds in the world, but they're in Europe and they're in America making money while Africa suffers. Why don't we create politically stable environment and call the children of Africa back home to help build Africa? We are your children, and we will come and help. And you should be ashamed not to look to yourself, begging white folk to give you what you could give yourself. What I said today, which one of these countries is going to give you $20 million? America's not going to give you $20 million. You got it right here, but your disunity won't allow you to pool it. That is why my message is atonement, reconciliation, and responsibility. We got to stop blaming everything on somebody else and see what is our responsibility here.
Would you want a Gaddafi or an Arafat or a Castro to be a future president of South Africa?
One of the mistakes which some political analysts make is to think that their enemies should be our enemies. That we can and we will never do. We have our own struggle which we are conducting. We are grateful to the world for supporting our struggle. But nevertheless, we are an independent organization with its own policy. And the attitude of every country towards, our attitude towards any country is determined by the attitude of that country to our struggle.
We don't believe in being enemies of somebody's enemy. No, we want to make our own enemies, not fight other people's enemies. This is our doctrine. When there was the Cold War, one day they asked me a question. Are you pro-East or pro-West? I said, you must think I am an idiot. Why do you think my main job is to be pro-somebody? I am pro myself. And I deal with all other people according to how they relate with my own interests. These people think we are stupid. Such a question is an idiotic question. It's not my job to be pro-East or pro-West. I am pro myself. And I deal with people according to how they relate with me. So, if you invite me to talk, you do so at your own risk. I can talk for a long time.
You think you are the only ones who respect human rights, or others it's about violating human rights. No, we've fought for human rights and freedoms of our people much better and more than anyone, including you people who keep talking about this nonsense. Why don't you talk about your human rights and stop just where we have taken our country from and where it is now? Speaks for itself. The rest of the stories just comes from this complex. You know, these two worlds where there are people who know everything about human rights and all kinds of things, and another world where people are just people who don't know. But these are our human rights. It's not, when we respect the things we respect in our country, it's not for you, it's not for anybody else, it's for ourselves.
Is it not
so
universal?
You don't sit
right.
there. Yes, it is universal, but you don't sit there. If it is universal and you believe it, then you don't become the judge yourself. You don't start telling the others what to do, what they should not to do, or that what they are doing is not to your satisfaction. Who are you?
Not sure if we're talking about me personally.
Well, you are the one actually raising these questions.
Corruption is a vile disease that sucks and drains the health out of something good. Corruption in society is an evil moral infection that keeps community in the state of perpetual sickness. Corruption is a moral virus. It's so potent it leaves its host sick, lethargic, and unable to realize and accomplish all that a well person can. Where corruption thrives, poverty and not prosperity thrives. Wealth is grabbed into the greedy, grubby hands of those who get fat on the toil and labor of good people. Corruption benefits, only temporarily, those who participate in it. Everyone else is a victim of the theft, the deceit, the dishonesty, and the lies that corruption feeds on. You need to know that a corrupt person is stealing from you. Corruption is filthy work and despicable acts of treachery done under the table and behind closed doors. Corruption is a disgusting shame. Corruption keeps a nation back from true development and from progress. Wise investors steer clear of a corrupt environment. They would rather put their resources into a place where the playing field of opportunity is equal for all and not bent towards feeding the financial lust of corrupt, lying, cheating, thieving politicians and government officials. How many wonderful development projects have been lost because the investors didn't want to do business in a swamp of evil? When those great projects go to another nation or to some other place, we all lose. Believe me when I tell you that corruption steals from you, it steals from all of us. Corruption plunders the nation's wealth. Corrupt people compromise on truth, equity, and fairness, choosing instead to feed off the short-term benefits of crookedness, exploitation, and financial perversion. Corruption is not just a personal matter. It's a culture. It's a way of life, not just for individual people, but for companies, communities, governments, and nations. Corrupt nations, hiding behind large companies, will seek to invest in other weak nations in order to take over the assets of the nation that they've invested into. They will provide financial loans to a nation for the much needed infrastructure, and they will do it with assets that they provide. They will sign contracts by lining the pockets of rotten government officials who participate in this kind of corruption and are then held hostage by their own deceit and greed. Corruption is nothing less than a form of theft and national robbery. A corrupt person steals from everyone in society.
About the relationship between money and power. They're very uncomfortable bedfellows because the one normally seeks the other. What is the point of having a lot of money if you have no power? So very quickly rich people start trying to translate that wealth into power. They start cozying up to politicians, they start trying to be politicians. And the opposite is also true. What is the point of having all this power and you're poor? So politicians start trying to monetize their power into wealth. And that is where corruption starts. So the relationship between money and power really is one that, if not managed well, destroys countries. And it's a difficult relationship because the one inevitably leads to the other. And how do you manage that? We face that challenge now. I think as First Lady, the question I always get asked is, how are you going to make sure that your business interests don't conflict with your existing role? What my husband and I have decided is we're going to do declarations. It's not required of me, it's not required of him, but we will declare all of our assets. And in that way, people can know what you own, where it is. I don't want to hide through proxies. And they can see where the wealth that you have has been created and not have to suspect you each time you buy expensive things that you stole it from the people. So declaration of assets, transparency, and communication are key issues in leadership. It's a double-edged sword. I don't necessarily want everybody to know what I own and how much it's worth, but I guess there's a bigger price to leadership at times. But it also comes down to a personal discomfort.
So what is narcissism?
So narcissism is a person who has a lack of empathy, and I'm going to talk about, or performative empathy, which I'm going to get to in a minute. Okay, so, but they have inconsistent or low empathy. They're very entitled. They're arrogant. They're egocentric. They're chronically validation and admiration seeking. They need to be in control all the time. They are poorly emotionally regulated, prone to show strong shows of rage if they're frustrated or disappointed or aren't getting their way. They're very easily provoked and very thin-skinned. If anyone gives them feedback or criticism, like, rah, they just rage very quickly. They can't regulate themselves at those times. They're very pretentious. They tend to be very superficial. I mean, the list goes, it's that kind of stuff. Now, the core of narcissism is a deep insecurity. And that's the piece we forget. These are not people actually who, at their most primal unconscious level, believe they're hype. All of this stuff is to create almost a suit of armor around that unprocessed insecurity. The narcissistic person is always fighting a battle against shame. And the shame is that at an unconscious level, people are going to see they ain't all that. So if anything even pokes them, that like even someone makes a joke at their expense, they lash out to maintain dominance. Because you also want to know what motivates the narcissistic person. Power, dominance, control, and frankly, safety, because all those things keep them safe. If they're in control, if they're the boss, if they have all the money, then they feel okay. All the power, whatever, the fame, whatever it looks like, then they're okay. That's narcissism.
There was another election. His party got more support. He was overthrown corporate interest, because corporate interest preferred, of course, that the United States companies dominate that country. And a lot of what politics is about, going way, way back to the 19th century, through England, France, is the domination of colonies so that big companies in a given country can take the resources of those countries for their own use. So I think that's what happened, and it was a very unfortunate day in American history. He won in a Democratic election, was popular, was overthrown, but he was okay. He was a good guy. Why? because he was a friend of corporate America.
But first, I just want to say this thing about foreign investment in Africa.
Yes.
One thing that is certain is, you see, it is easier to mismanage money or funds that are borrowed or comes in grant than funds that are mobilized by grassroots individuals. If we have a common project here and all of us put in $1, we will all go back home keeping track of where our $1 is going. And that doesn't make politicians comfortable. So that is a no-go area for many governments in the continent. Now, when it comes to the infrastructure in Africa, we have to understand that we cannot get the world work for the continent, as in my friend's words, unless and until we have the infrastructure that attracts them to work and get something remaining. The poor infrastructure is what enables capital flights and direct investment occurring within Africa. Because in most instances today, when we look at the logistics, for instance, how many of our big businesses, the likes of Dangote, who invest a lot on distribution, will tell you that in many African society today, the Dangote group cannot operate as a result of poor logistic, poor infrastructure. Now, we cannot talk about regional integration if we do not build the infrastructure across the continent. How do we expect the Gambia to produce and grow if an infrastructure is not built for Gambians to integrate and interact and do business with Ghanaians, Nigerians, and other parts of the continent? Another good example is Rwanda today is seen as one of the fastest growing economies in the world. In the top 10, Rwanda is there. In terms of size in the economy, is around 143 out of 193. That is the disaster that occurs because there is no common market across the continent. So these are things that we, the youths, of course, find very difficult to comprehend. There are so many Africans who need to rethink about investment in the continent. Instead of hoarding and hiding our money outside of the continent, we have to come, have trust in the youths, invest in the skills, and influence our governments to forcefully put the enabling grounds so that we can integrate. Africa as a continent, we are made to believe that we have to stick with the financial institutions and financial dealings which are already set by a world without consulting Africa. And this has been the biggest disasters that we young people in the continent will have to leave generations to pay for. When we look at the numbers, we keep borrowing and yet don't multiply. And yet the same numbers that we're talking about cannot be channeled into human development. And that is the threat, that is the fear, and that is the anger and frustration that every African youth today is facing. So we need to have a paradigm shift in the way we deal with the rest of the world, first by looking at partnership. But then a key important element will be, how do we capitalize on wealth generation within our own environment without destroying it for future generations, but at the same time have an independent Africa that is fit to produce and distribute for itself evenly. But whenever it comes to the numbers, I am telling you that not just myself, but the 450 plus million youths of the continent are all living in fear of a debt we have to live and pay for, and it has not done anything meaningful to our life and for generations of Africans to come. The first important aspect that we need to invest in as young people, and this is what I've been doing for the past 2 years, is to invest in the mindset. It is not all the time the skill set. We have young people that are dynamic and have skills and can change the paradigm. But how do we change in our thoughts and look inward in the continent to make sure that Africa is able to produce for its own?
The young man raises some very significant points. If I was listening to that young man and I wasn't watching, I would have thought I was listening to a 40-year or 50-year-old man. The knowledge he brought to this and the awakening he brings to both the older and the young, the youth in Africa, is something we need to tap into. Nothing is too late. Africa strongly needs to look into leadership from within, good leadership from within. The Secretary of State of the United States, Beckon, was in Abuja this week and visiting other African countries. The question is, he's doing what's in the best interest of America. He's there to protect America's interests. The question is, are the leaders of Africa that he's visiting also doing what's in the best interest of Africa? These are the serious questions we need to be asking our leaders in Africa. It's time for all of us to really start challenging what our leaders are doing. If we don't challenge what they are doing, we cannot keep complaining about what they are doing wrong. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, this is Fred Nwankwo coming to you from our studios in Chicago with another edition of Bold Talk on Island TV. And until next time, good night and God bless.
You